So get this. A new global tax scheme, supposedly designed to save the planet, might actually crank up pollution, slam the brakes on trade, and really hit the wallets of American families and seniors the hardest. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, our mission is, well, it's to cut through all the noise and really analyze this huge stack of sources we've got. They detail this immediate fight brewing over the UN's proposed global carbon tax on international shipping. And look, this isn't just some abstract environmental policy chat. No, it's about global commerce. It's about the cost of basically everything you buy, and it's frankly about a simmering international trade conflict. We're digging into the research to pull out these nuggets that show the unexpected and potentially pretty catastrophic economic environmental fallout from this whole proposal.
Yeah, and the timing here is critical. This isn't years away. We're trapped in the UN's International Maritime Organization, the IMO. They're poised, maybe as soon as October 2025, to approve their big net zero framework. And this framework, it isn't just, a friendly suggestion. It lays down mandatory greenhouse gas limits and, crucially, this emissions pricing system, basically a tax on global shipping.
Okay, and what really throws fuel on the fire here is the pushback, the really strong opposition coming from the U.S. administration, right?
Absolutely. Our sources show the U.S. government is flat out rejecting this plan. They're calling it, and this is a quote, a European-led neocolonial export of global climate regulation.
Wow, neocolonial export. That's strong language. They're really framing this as a kind of harmful global carbon tax aimed squarely at U.S. consumers.
Exactly. And it's not just talk. They're backing it up with some pretty severe threats. The U.S. has basically put nations on notice. Vote for this, and you could face serious retaliation. We're talking about stuff that really kicks off a trade conflict.
Like what kind of retaliation?
Things like blocking vessels from U.S. ports, slapping on massive extra port fees, maybe even restricting visas for the crews on these ships. The message is clear. This is an economic red line for the U.S.
Okay, economic red lines. We need to understand the potential impact here. What are the analysts saying this could actually do to, the cost of trade?
The warnings are pretty stark. Analysts are suggesting this IMO measure could disastrously jack up global shipping costs, maybe 10% or even more, almost overnight.
10% plus, instantly.
Yeah. And remember, almost all the world's big container ships, the oil tankers, they're built outside the U.S., mostly in Asia. So this policy is basically targeting the very ships that bring in, 90% of the non-oil goods we consume here in America. It really feels like a fight to protect our supply chains from this global tax burden.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanism here. It still seems kind of bizarre that an environmental rule, something pitched as reducing pollution, could trigger such huge economic disruption. How does an environmental reg designed for maybe a small emissions cut turn into a massive cost hike, doubling shipping costs, potentially?
It really boils down to, the simple physics of moving giant ships across oceans and the fact that the tech just isn't there yet, Sustainable, low-carbon fuels or some revolutionary new engine, they're just not scalable or affordable for the whole global fleet right now. So the main way ships have to comply under this new framework is mandatory slow steaming.
Slow steaming. It means going slower. Right?
Exactly. To hit the required carbon intensity rating, they give them grades like A, B, C. Ships rated poorly, say D or E, they have to cut their speed pretty drastically to get up to a C. The research we looked at shows that for ships heading to the U.S., the average speed cut needed is about 5.2%.
5%. Okay. On the surface, that doesn't sound like a world-ending number. So how does a 5% speed cut translate into maybe 145% price hike for freight? That seems wildly out of proportion.
It is disproportionate, and the reason is how incredibly close the global shipping industry runs to its absolute maximum capacity. Think of it like a busy highway at rush hour. Say you've got 4 lanes running full tilt. Now you close one lane, that's a 25% physical cut in capacity. Do you see traffic slow down by 25%? No way. You get gridlock, right? Total standstill?
Because the system was already maxed out.
Ah, okay. That clicks. So there's very little slack in the shipping world.
Precisely. Container shipping operates right near the edge, Idle capacity averages maybe just 2 or 3%. So when you force ships to slow down by 5%, you're not just using up that tiny bit of slack. You immediately slash the number of trips they can make in a year. That creates an immediate cut in effective capacity that's way bigger than just the 5% speed reduction number suggests. And the research actually put a number on that capacity cut.
It did, the slowdown effect. It's estimated to cut effective capacity for U.S. imports by about 5.9% overall. But, and this is key, some routes get slammed much harder. Like China's export capacity might drop by about 4.2%, but Europe, Germany specifically, they could see their capacity cut by over 10%. And when you choke off capacity like that, especially in a market for essentials where demand is tight, prices just, they spike violently.
So the economic models take that capacity squeeze, apply it to the market. What do they actually predict for the freight price itself, the bill you pay?
They project this forced capacity crunch could more than double the average ocean freight rate. We're talking increases somewhere between 100% and 145%. It's basically a direct tax on global commerce.
100 to 145% increase.
Yeah. And when you translate that into, what it means for people, the researchers estimate this policy would cause huge welfare losses for American consumers. They put a number on it, somewhere between $4.6 and $7.1 billion every single year.
Yeah.
That's the price tag for using mandatory slowdowns as your main tool.
Okay, so the narrative is save the planet, but the economic pain looks immense. But here's maybe the biggest shocker from the sources. All this pain doesn't even seem to buy us the environmental win they promised. What's the fundamental environmental failure researchers are flagging here?
This is the really critical unintended consequence. It's known sometimes as the green paradox, but here specifically, it's carbon leakage. It's pretty simple, actually. Yeah. When you artificially double the cost of shipping by sea and you deliberately make deliveries slower, which, let's be honest, consumers and businesses hate what happens. People shift. Demand for time-sensitive stuff, high-value goods. It moves away from the ocean.
And onto planes. Air freight.
Exactly. Onto air transportation.
And why is that shift so bad from a climate perspective? I mean, planes versus ships.
Oh, it's devastatingly bad. Air cargo is just fundamentally incompatible with serious carbon reduction for moving goods. The estimates are that air transport is about 2 orders of magnitude more carbon intensive than sending the same stuff in a container ship.
2 orders of magnitude? Wait, unpack that. How much worse exactly did the research say planes are?
Okay, the specific number they found is roughly 90 times greater carbon intensity per ton of goods moved by air compared to an American container ship. 90 times.
90, wow.
So the policy is literally pushing cargo off a system that's already pretty efficient, ton for ton, onto basically the worst possible alternative from a CO2 perspective.
So, okay, ocean emissions might go down a bit because ships slow down. But if a chunk of that cargo just jumps onto planes, what's the net effect? What happens to total global pollution levels from transport?
Well, the short-term models confirm this paradox, this leakage effect. Ocean emissions, yes, they do drop by about 16.5%. That part technically works as intended, but
there's always a but.
Air emissions, at the same time, are projected to increase by up to 42%. That's because they estimate about a 31% shift in cargo capacity moving from sea to air.
A 42% increase in air pollution, just to avoid the slow, expensive ships.
That's what the modeling suggests, yes.
Yeah.
So the net result, you add the decrease from the ocean and the massive increase from the air. Combined CO2 emissions from both air and ocean transport actually increase.
Increase. The whole point was to decrease them.
Right. They increase by up to 18% in the short term. The sources are really blunt about this. The initial environmental harm is so significant that it would take a full decade, even in the best-case long-run scenario, just to offset the extra pollution caused in the first few years.
So it actually makes pollution worse initially?
For potentially up to a decade, yes. It's regulation that causes an environmental setback before it even starts to maybe help.
That's genuinely staggering. A rule meant to cut pollution causes a big short-term increase in pollution while also jacking up costs.
Okay, let's pick it from trade and pollution numbers to the human cost. When you layer on this kind of global carbon pricing, who are the really vulnerable groups, say, in developed countries like the U.S., that get caught in this crossfire of high cost and often fixed incomes?
Well, carbon pricing in general tends to be regressive, right? It hits poor households harder as a share of their income. But the research we dug into specifically points to the low-income elderly as facing this kind of overlapping, unique set of risks that often get overlooked in the broad policy debates. And this isn't a small group. We're talking about a huge and growing global demographic projected to hit 2.1 billion people over 60 by 2050.
Okay, so beyond just having lower incomes, what makes this group particularly sensitive to these kinds of price shocks from energy or imported goods? There are really 3 key things that stack up. First, fixed incomes. They're often relying on pensions, maybe some savings. And they usually face real physical barriers to just, going out and earning more money if costs rise. Second, their lifestyles tend to be highly energy dependent. They often spend more time at home, and they need stable heating and cooling. They're physiologically more sensitive to temperature changes. It's a health issue.
Right. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity.
Uh-huh.
And their spending patterns are different too, aren't they? More rigid.
Exactly. Their spending is generally less flexible. It's on necessities, not discretionary stuff. Think about it. They can't just easily cut back on essential medication or, crucially, on heating their home if prices jump. So what happens is the share of their budget that has to go to these rigid needs, like housing energy, ends up being way higher for low-income seniors compared to younger folks or wealthier households.
Now, the standard political answer you always hear with carbon taxes is, don't worry, we'll protect the vulnerable, we'll give the money back, everyone gets a check or rebate. Does that actually work for the elderly, according to this research?
This was one of the most, frankly, surprising findings in the papers we read. The most common proposal, what they call the average rebate scenario, where you just divide up the carbon tax revenue equally and send everyone the same check. It just flat out fails to protect the elderly in developed countries, places like the US and Japan.
Wait, hang on. A universal rebate, the thing everyone talks about as the fix. You're saying the experts found that even in rich countries, the elderly actually lose money overall with that. They pay more and higher prices than they get back in the check.
That's precisely it. They end up being net contributors. In both the US and Japan, the studies showed that all elderly income groups, not just the poorest, but all of them are net contributors under that standard rebate scheme.
So they get the check.
They get the check, yes, but the cost of the things they absolutely have to buy, keeping the heat on, essential imported goods, medications may be linked to global supply chains, it goes up so much that the check doesn't cover the difference. They're worse off. The research showed they only really see a net positive benefit under very specific, highly targeted, and probably complex to administer schemes, like one they call the elderly poverty rebate scenario. The simple, universal approach fails them.
Okay, so let's recap where we are. We have this UN policy proposal that looks set to significantly hike global trade costs, risks sparking a trade war with the U.S., actually increases net pollution in the short term because of this leakage to air freight, and it disproportionately burdens seniors on fixed incomes, even with standard rebates, which just begs the critical question, who actually benefits from designing a policy this way? If it's causing all these problems, who, according to the research, is potentially winning here?
Well, the sources do suggest looking at the structure of the IMO itself. It's largely made up of representatives from, the existing shipping companies, the big shipbuilders, the financiers who back them. And the research suggests that this can lead to policies that, perhaps unsurprisingly, end up aligning pretty well with the industry's own objectives, even if they come at a high cost to consumers or the immediate climate goals.
So you're suggesting the policy might actually serve the interests of the powerful players who are in the room helping write the rules, despite all these negative side effects we've discussed.
The numbers highlighted in the research certainly point in that direction. Because this net zero framework essentially works by artificially restricting capacity through slow steaming, it's projected to cause a massive spike in carriers' short-term revenue. Think about it. Restrict supply, price goes up. The projection was for a 114% to 120% increase in the revenue in the short term. They cash in.
Okay, so carriers make more money immediately. What about the longer term?
Well, in the long run, to get global trade back to where it needs to be while complying with the slower speed rules, the world will simply need more ships. The estimate is between 5.6% and 10.6% more new vessels. And who benefits from a surge in demand for new ships? The shipbuilders and the banks that finance those billion-dollar assets. So yeah, the outcome seems to optimize profitability for the major industry players, even if consumers end up paying the price.
But the research wasn't just critical, was it? The sources also seem to explore some smarter alternatives, policies that might actually cut emissions and help consumers, kind of rejecting this idea that we have to accept huge economic pain for climate action.
Yes, absolutely. That's where the analysis got really constructive, I thought. The researchers modeled a couple of surprising policies that actually improved welfare, improved the economy. The first one involved using targeted taxes or subsidies differently. Instead of taxing the relatively efficient sea transport and forcing slowdowns, what if you subsidized it? Or, maybe more powerfully, what if you taxed the highly inefficient air transport?
So directly tackling that leakage problem we talked about, taxing the planes instead of slowing the ships. What did the models show for that?
By taxing air cargo directly, you discourage that shift from sea to air. The models showed you could achieve the same overall long-run emission reduction target as the IMO plan, but you do it with a net increase in welfare for consumers, potentially up to $3.9 billion.
Wow. So same climate goal, but consumers are billions richer instead of billions poorer. That sounds like a much better deal.
It's a clear potential win-win based on that modeling. Lower emissions, higher consumer benefit, and you likely avoid the whole trade war aspect too.
Okay, and the second alternative was even more counterintuitive, wasn't it? Something about actually going faster.
Yeah, this one really flips the script. The second alternative they looked at was a first speed up, just in the short term. It sounds crazy for climate policy, right? Speed up ships.
Right, because speeding up burns more fuel per hour, doesn't it?
It does. But the modeling showed that a modest increase, just 1% faster for ocean vessels, would actually expand effective capacity, which would cause freight rates to drop. And because sea transport becomes cheaper and faster relative to air, it pulls cargo back from planes onto ships. The net result. Combined emissions from sea and air actually go down by 1.8% to 2.3% in the short term.
Hold on, so speeding the ships up slightly makes things cheaper for consumers and reduces overall pollution in the short term because it kills the leakage to air freight.
That's exactly what the short-term model indicated, because that leakage to air cargo is the biggest environmental failure of the slow steaming approach initially. By speeding ships up just a little, you make sea transport more competitive, you reduce the incentive to fly goods, and you bring that pollution back down to the much more efficient maritime sector and the economic benefit. A welfare increase for consumers estimated between $830 million and $910 million. Plus, you get an immediate net reduction in pollution. It's a complete rejection of the slowdown mandate, at least as a short-term fix.
So this deep dive, it's really shown that just relying on these top-down bureaucratic mandates for climate policy can, well, it can backfire spectacularly. You drive global costs up by double digits. You actually fail to cut pollution in the short run because of this disastrous carbon leakage. And you place the heaviest burden on the most vulnerable groups, like seniors. And all this happens while, maybe not coincidentally, the policy seems to benefit the big industry players who were involved in crafting the rules.
Yeah, I think the ultimate takeaway here, especially for you listening, is just how vital it is to think about systemic effects. A regulation that looks narrowly at just one sector, like shipping here, it can cause these huge, maybe unforeseen spillover effects into another sector, air cargo in this case, that completely undermine the original goal. It shows that poorly designed policies don't just cost us money, they can actively harm the very climate mission they were supposedly created to serve.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on as this whole debate unfolds internationally. If the real goal, the genuine policy aim, is to cut global emissions quickly and effectively, maybe governments should stop focusing on punitive taxes that choke capacity and slow down commerce. Maybe they should instead look at direct subsidies or incentives to make low-carbon ocean transport faster and cheaper right now, using market forces to actively outcompete the much dirtier air freight alternative. Something to think about.